Now this one's a little more difficult. I will tell you that the individual that is deceased, if you don't know already, his name is Joshua Lewis, and he is 23 years of age. He is a validated Eastside Fresno Bulldog, and we'll begin there. And I believe we had 21 calls, Justin?
23, Chief.
23. We had 23 911 calls regarding this incident that occurred at Shaw and Polk Avenue last night. So let me start from the beginning. At about 5:21 p.m., that happened to be the same time that the call came in where the officers were shot at. 5:21 p.m. At Marks and Emerson, there was a traffic collision that occurred involving a white van. That white van was driven by Joshua Lewis. He is the owner of that van, or at least the driver of that van. He was involved in a traffic collision at that location. He had two passengers in the vehicle with him. One of them is a Hector Areola, and who is I believe is a cousin, and also Sabrina Areola, who was in that vehicle, is a cousin to Hector. Those two individuals were left behind in the van. They were both injured and had to be removed from the van with jaws of life from the fire department. Shortly after the collision, Joshua Lewis, there was a lot of the vehicles at this intersection when this collision occurred. The suspect, Joshua Lewis, got out of the vehicle, ran over to the red pickup that you see on the wall. That pickup was being driven by a man and a woman. Directly behind them was their daughter, who was following them. The suspect, Joshua Lewis, attempted to get into the passenger side of the pickup, but they would not allow him in. He was bleeding. He then went to their daughter's vehicle, which was directly behind him, and got into the passenger side of the vehicle and immediately told her to go, and to drive away from the area, which she complied. She complied mainly because at that point she was perhaps confused, but had a fear factor, which she believed if she did not drive away that something might happen to her. The female then drove Joshua Lewis over into the area of Shaw and Polk and drove around the liquor store. Initially, it was reported that the suspect got out and went into the liquor store. That did not occur. What did happen is he had her drive around the back of the liquor store. He then got out and attempted to get into a residence at 4966 North Polk. That happens to be the same address in which the white van that was involved in the collision is registered to. So we believe that is where Lewis was staying. He did tell the female to wait for him while he went inside, and at that time, as soon as he got out of the car, went toward the residence, she drove away and immediately called 911, pulled over to the Comfort Inn, parked behind the Comfort Inn, facing Shaw Avenue, and waited on the cell phone as she called 911. The Lewis then realized that she was gone, walked out onto Shaw Avenue, and I want to give you a picture of Shaw Avenue at this time. It was about 5:40, 5:45. It was bumper to bumper traffic. Cars were in both the number 1 and the number 2 lane driving eastbound, and again, they may have been traveling 1 to 2 miles per hour. So a lot of vehicular traffic out on Shaw Avenue at that time. As you know, there is a on-ramp to Shaw Avenue a couple of hundred yards just east of Polk. At that time, Lewis walked out onto Shaw Avenue and began firing this handgun indiscriminately at vehicles as they were driving on Shaw eastbound. We do not know how many vehicles were struck or if any other vehicles were struck, but we do know that he was firing a .44 caliber revolver at those vehicles. We do know that Lewis did shoot the driver of a blue van that was traveling eastbound. He was shot in the stomach area. The driver continued to drive eastbound, was able to get onto the southbound off-ramp or on-ramp of Shaw, 99 on-ramp, and ultimately drove a considerable or a distance and pulled over, called 911, and emergency personnel came to render him aid. That was the first shooting. He did not attempt to carjack that driver of the van as we originally had assumed. It does not appear that he was there for the purpose of carjacking any motorist. This shooting, as well as the shooting indiscriminately at vehicles, was witnessed by an off-duty sergeant for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. He was at the intersection with his wife, saw this individual with the gun indiscriminately firing at the vehicles, and he pulled over into the 76 gas station that was across the street. And after he had pulled in there, he got out of his vehicle, retrieved his personal firearm, and began to walk eastbound on the north side of Shaw as he tracked this suspect armed with a gun that was firing into vehicles. The CDCR sergeant was attempting to use concealment as he made his way down there, but again, recognizing that this individual was armed. Lewis, the suspect, then approached a pickup truck that was traveling eastbound. It was occupied by a husband and wife. The husband was driving. He approached the driver's side and fired 2 rounds into that vehicle. One of the rounds struck the driver and killed him, and the second round ended up striking his wife in the right arm. Lewis then began to walk over to the north side of Shaw. There was a Ford Focus, you can see it in this photograph here, the silver Ford Focus, that was pulling out of a tire shop and preparing to go westbound onto Shaw, when Lewis fired into the driver's side window. That vehicle was driven by a female, and she continued to drive, to accelerate out of the area, and drove away westbound. And no indication that he was attempting to carjack her, simply had fired at her indiscriminately. At that same time, there was a SUV that was also traveling westbound on Shaw, and Lewis fired 1 round at that SUV as it approached, striking the hood of that SUV, and that round, for whatever reason, caused the instrument panel lights in that vehicle to go out. The driver of the vehicle stopped immediately, got out of the driver's side, and he yelled at Lewis, "What are you doing? My 5-year-old brother is inside." He then ran around the car, opened the right rear passenger door, grabbed his 5-year-old brother, and concealed him in front of him, and turned his back to the suspect in hopes that the suspect would not fire. The CDCR correctional officer was nearby at that point, and he heard the statement being made by the 19-year-old driver of that SUV that his 5-year-old brother was inside. He did not know that the 19-year-old had actually entered the vehicle, grabbed his brother, and took off running. What he did see, though, was that the 19-year-old was running towards the tire shop with his back towards the suspect. And the suspect raised the gun and pointed it directly at the 19-year-old and actually pulled the trigger. And this was a revolver, so it dry fired, meaning that it did not strike a round. Maybe there was an empty cylinder, or maybe there was an empty casing that it had already been fired. The CDCR sergeant had already seen this occur on a previous occasion when he was firing on Shaw, that there was dry fire that was occurring, because he saw him actually unloading rounds from the empty casings from the revolver, putting them into his pocket, and then reloading. So when he saw Lewis pointing this handgun at the back of the 19-year-old as he was fleeing, he felt that that person's life was in danger, and at that time the sergeant fired 1 round, striking Lewis in the back. Lewis then ran around to the driver's side of the SUV and got inside and was going to drive away. He was confronted by the sergeant, who told him to get his hands up and to get out of the vehicle. At some point, Lewis complied, got out of the vehicle, and went to the rear of the SUV and placed his hands up in the air. For whatever reason, Lewis then ran back into the driver's side, got behind the wheel of the car, and started to reach down into the floorboard. At that time, the sergeant felt that not only was he reaching for a gun, but that he had a 5-year-old boy inside of that vehicle that was endangered. This sergeant heroically fired 2 rounds into that vehicle, striking the suspect Lewis somewhere in the right lower neck, upper chest area. At that time, ironically, a male nurse was driving by eastbound on Shaw who happened to be armed with a firearm and had a CCW permit. He got out of the vehicle and approached the suspect as well. And shortly thereafter, after the sergeant fired, he told the nurse, I'm out of rounds, cover me, which the nurse did. And it was shortly thereafter that the suspect, Lewis, started the car, started the SUV, and drove away westbound onto Shaw. 8 miles later, he crashed into a ditch at Jameson and Shaw and attempted to walk away, but died as a result of the gunshot wounds that he had received. What we have today is one deceased male, his wife who has been injured, shot in the arm. They've been married 40 years. And we also have one male who was driving a van who is in critical condition in the hospital today. Fortunately, this off-duty CDCR sergeant intervened and acted very, very heroically. Fortunately, he was armed, and as a result of his actions, he prevented this 19-year-old from being shot as he was running from the vehicle, and perhaps even prevented other people from being shot that were passing by. CDCR sergeant is a former Marine. He has a previous deployment to Somalia, and no doubt he is a hero. He fired 3 to 4 rounds from his personal weapon, and again, no doubt that he prevented the loss of life. The suspect in this case, Joshua Lewis, 23 years of age, is on formal felony probation, and again, he is a validated Eastside Fresno Bulldog. You know, there were some things that occurred during the course of this evening where you have the 19-year-old driver, the brother of the 5-year-old, who actually made it a point to not only retrieve his 5-year-old from the vehicle, but to conceal him, to grab him and to cover him so that in the event he was shot, he would protect his younger brother. You have the heroic efforts of the CDCR sergeant who intervened, put his life at risk in order to prevent anyone else from being shot, and then you have a male nurse who happened to be driving by, armed with a firearm, and intervened as well and covered the officer. So it is a tragic incident that occurred in our city. It's an isolated incident. We have no other indications that this individual had fired at vehicles before, although that may have occurred. But what we do know is we have a tragic incident in our city.